There's a lie we're taught about love. That forgiveness is always virtuous. That endurance is proof of depth. That if you love someone enough, you should be able to survive anything they do to you. I no longer believe that. Some actions don't test a relationship. They end it. Not because you're weak, but because staying would require you to disappear, piece by piece, quietly, until you no longer recognize who you are or why you're there. What nobody tells you is this: forgiveness without change isn't compassion, it's self-betrayal. And there are behaviors so corrosive that accepting them doesn't make you loving. It makes you complicit in your own erosion. This isn't about anger. It isn't about revenge. And it isn't about demonizing anyone. It's about clarity. About knowing the exact moment when love stops being love and starts becoming damage. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through the acts that should never be forgiven. Not because you hate the other person, but because you finally respect yourself. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if conversations like this matter to you, consider subscribing. Calmly. On your own terms. Before anything else, I need to be precise about what this is and what it is not. This is not a call to hatred. It is not an invitation to conflict. And it is not a manifesto against forgiveness itself. Forgiveness, when paired with accountability and real change, can be powerful. It can restore trust. It can repair what was damaged. But forgiveness without change is something else entirely. It is permission. It is silence. It is an agreement to live smaller, so someone else doesn't have to grow. Most people are taught that love means endurance, that staying is noble, that leaving is failure. We are praised for patience, for understanding, for giving chances far past the point where those chances make sense. And because of that, many people stay in relationships long after the relationship has stopped being a relationship and has become a slow form of self-erasure. Here is the distinction most people never learn to make. Mistakes are forgivable. Patterns are not. A mistake is an action followed by insight, responsibility, and change. A pattern is behavior repeated after it has already caused harm. Patterns tell you who someone is not, who they wish they were. When someone shows you the same behavior again and again, they are not confused. They are consistent. This conversation is about patterns. It's about the moment when you stop asking, "Can we fix this?" and start asking, "Why am I still here?" It's about recognizing when the cost of staying has exceeded any possible benefit of hoping. There are lines that should not be crossed in a relationship. Not because you are rigid, not because you are unforgiving, but because crossing them changes the nature of the bond itself. It turns partnership into power struggle, intimacy into leverage, love into control. Once that shift happens, the relationship does not need more patience. It needs honesty. Another truth people avoid is this: dignity is not negotiable. You cannot bargain with it. You cannot trade it for affection or stability or history. The moment you start sacrificing your dignity to keep a relationship intact, the relationship has already failed. You're just the last one to accept it. I've watched people rationalize almost anything. They explain away behavior that would horrify them if it happened to a friend. They minimize actions that would end any other relationship instantly. They tell themselves stories to survive what they should have left. He didn't mean it. She was just emotional. It's been a stressful time. They had a difficult childhood. Explanations are easy to find. Accountability is not. Understanding why someone behaves the way they do does not make the behavior acceptable. Insight is not a substitute for boundaries. Compassion does not require self-destruction. One of the most dangerous myths about relationships is that unconditional love means unconditional tolerance of behavior. It doesn't. Unconditional love, if it exists at all, does not require unconditional access to you. You can care about someone and still refuse to let them harm you. You can love someone and still walk away. Boundaries are not punishments. They are definitions. They define what you will and will not live with. They are not about controlling the other person. They are about protecting yourself. When people hear the phrase unforgivable, they often react emotionally. They imagine cruelty or coldness. But unforgivable does not mean you hold on to anger forever. It means you do not rewrite reality to make something survivable that should not be survived. Some behaviors permanently alter trust. Some actions destroy safety. Some patterns make intimacy impossible. When those things are gone, the relationship is no longer a relationship. It's a negotiation with harm. And here is the part most people don't want to hear. You do not owe anyone infinite chances. Time invested does not obligate you to continue investing. Love felt does not require you to keep absorbing damage. Promises made in the past do not cancel out behavior in the present. Staying is not always strength. Sometimes it is fear disguised as loyalty. Fear of being alone. Fear of starting over. Fear of admitting that what you believed in is no longer real. Leaving forces you to face uncertainty. Staying allows you to avoid it at the cost of yourself. Many people believe that if they just explain themselves better, love harder, forgive deeper, or wait longer, the other person will eventually change. But change does not come from tolerance. It comes from consequences. And some people only change partners, not patterns. Another hard truth is that not every relationship is meant to be healed. Some are meant to be survived. Some are meant to teach you what you will never accept again. And some are meant to end so you can return to yourself. This is not about perfection. Every relationship has conflict. Every person has flaws. The question is not whether someone is imperfect. The question is whether they are safe, whether they are honest, whether they respect your autonomy, whether they are capable of accountability. When those elements are missing, love becomes irrelevant. You cannot build a future with someone who requires you to abandon your present self. You cannot grow with someone who benefits from your shrinking. You cannot create intimacy with someone who sees your boundaries as obstacles instead of necessities. This is why certain acts must be treated as deal breakers, not dramatically, not angrily, but decisively. Because when you ignore clear violations, you teach people how to treat you. And more importantly, you teach yourself what you believe you deserve. In the next sections, I'm going to walk through specific behaviors that cross these lines. Not hypotheticals, not extremes that only happen to other people. These are patterns that show up quietly, gradually, often disguised as love, humor, concern, or passion. If any of them feel familiar, that doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. But familiarity should not be confused with acceptability. Clarity is not cruelty. Leaving is not failure. And refusing to forgive what destroys you is not bitterness. It is self-preservation. The first unforgivable act is systematic lying. Not the harmless kind. Not the kind meant to protect a surprise or spare a feeling. I'm talking about the kind of lying that becomes structural, the kind that reshapes reality until you're no longer sure what's true and what was designed for you to believe. This is the person who lies about where they are, who they're with, what they spend, what they promise. They don't just lie occasionally. They lie as a method, Once someone decides that lying to you is acceptable, they have made a deeper decision. They have decided that your perception of reality does not matter. And when your reality doesn't matter, neither does your consent, your safety, or your trust. I once worked with a man who thought his partner's lies were minor. At first, they were small: the cost of a purchase, the reason she was late, who she was texting. He didn't confront her because it felt petty. He told himself relationships require flexibility. What he didn't realize was that each lie was a test. By the time the truth surfaced, he learned she had hidden tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt. She had a second phone used exclusively for dating apps. She was telling friends that he was abusive to justify her absence from home. Not because it was true, but because it was convenient. The lying wasn't the problem. It was the evidence. It showed how she saw him, not as a partner, as an obstacle. This is how chronic liars operate. They don't start big. They start small to measure your tolerance. They lie about a $3 coffee that was actually $7. You don't challenge it. They note that. Then they lie about staying late at work when they're out drinking. Then about just a friend they're emotionally involved with. Each accepted lie teaches them that your trust has no cost. And once trust has no cost, it has no value. People often ask why liars don't just stop. The answer is simple. Because lying works. It avoids discomfort. It maintains control. It allows them to live multiple lives without consequences. You cannot build intimacy with someone who edits reality. The second unforgivable act is public humiliation disguised as humor. This one is subtle, which makes it dangerous. It's the partner who tells embarrassing stories about you at parties, who mocks your interests in front of friends, who undermines your authority in front of your children. They'll say things like, "Don't ask him about money. He can barely balance a checkbook," or "She's trying to get in shape again. Let's see how long this lasts." When you react, they deflect. You're too sensitive. You can't take a joke. But jokes are meant to be shared. If you're consistently the only one not laughing, it's not humor. It's positioning. This behavior is about dominance, about lowering your status in front of others to elevate theirs. It erodes how people see you and eventually how you see yourself. There's a reason this cuts so deeply. Public humiliation attacks identity. It doesn't just hurt privately. It rewrites how you exist in the social world. It turns you into a punchline instead of a person. I counseled a man whose wife mocked him constantly. In private, she criticized his career, his hobbies, his appearance. In public, she packaged his failures as entertainment. At family dinners, she interrupted him to correct his stories. She rolled her eyes at his opinions. She apologized to others for his quirks. He stayed for 5 years believing this was normal relationship friction. When he finally left, he needed years of therapy to trust his own thoughts again. Not because he was weak, but because contempt is corrosive. It eats away at self-worth quietly, relentlessly. Here's what matters most about this behavior. Contempt is the clearest predictor of relationship failure. Once someone sees you with contempt, the relationship is already over. What remains is maintenance, damage control, survival. Love cannot coexist with contempt. The third unforgivable act is emotional manipulation and blackmail. This is the person who threatens to hurt themselves if you leave, who cries to win arguments, who uses your love as leverage. If you loved me, you would. A real man would. I guess I'm just not enough for you. These are not expressions of vulnerability. They are strategies. Manipulators turn your compassion into a weapon against you. They study your fears and exploit them. your fear of abandonment, your desire to be good, your instinct to protect, all become points of pressure. This is emotional terrorism. They hold your empathy hostage and demand compliance as ransom. And here is the line that matters. Someone who truly loves you would never make you responsible for their emotional survival. They would not threaten self-destruction to keep you close. They would not punish you for having boundaries. They would not turn your care into a trap. Real love wants you to choose it freely, not from guilt, not from fear, not from obligation. If someone's primary tool in conflict is manipulation, they are not trying to resolve issues. They are trying to control outcomes, and control is not love. The fourth unforgivable act is boundary violation presented as intimacy. This is the partner who goes through your phone while you sleep, who shows up unannounced at your workplace to check on you, who interrogates every conversation you have when they're not present. They'll frame it as concern, as devotion, as proof of how much they care. But love does not require surveillance. Privacy is not secrecy. It is autonomy. It is the space required to remain an individual inside a relationship. When someone violates your boundaries, they are starting something clearly. Your independence is a threat to them. I've seen people install tracking apps for safety, demand explanations for every expense, show up at social gatherings uninvited because they missed you too much. This is not romance. It is monitoring. And once monitoring becomes normal, the relationship shifts. You are no longer equals. You are subject and overseer, prisoner and warden. Healthy intimacy respects boundaries. It does not erase them. When someone insists that access equals love, they are confusing attachment with ownership. And ownership has no place in a healthy relationship. Each of these acts has something in common. They don't happen once. They don't happen accidentally. And they don't improve with patience alone. They are patterns. And patterns tell the truth when words do not. If you find yourself constantly explaining, minimizing, or defending behavior that makes you feel smaller, pay attention. That feeling is not confusion. It is recognition. In the next part, we'll move into behaviors that cross from psychological harm into direct threats to safety and freedom. And once those lines are crossed, the consequences become far more serious. The fifth unforgivable act is physical aggression in any form. Before anything else, this needs to be said clearly. Abuse is abuse. Strength, gender, or size do not change that fact. A slap, a shove, throwing objects, punching walls, destroying property. None of these are expressions of emotion. They are demonstrations of power. Physical aggression is a message. It says, I am willing to use force to control this situation. People often minimize early signs because they are not yet direct. A slammed door, a broken glass, a hole in the wall. They tell themselves it was just anger, just stress, just a bad moment. But aggression is not an accident. It is a rehearsal. What makes physical aggression especially dangerous is that it always escalates. The push becomes a shove. The shove becomes a slap. The slap becomes a punch. Each act that is forgiven teaches the aggressor something critical. That violence works. That fear keeps you close. That consequences are temporary if they exist at all. I once knew someone whose partner only became aggressive while drinking. At first, it was posturing, loud gestures, intimidating proximity. Then came thrown objects. Eventually, it became direct physical attacks. Each incident was followed by remorse, tears, promises, declarations of love. But here's the truth people avoid. Violent individuals choose their targets carefully. They do not hit their boss. They do not throw objects at police officers. They do not lose control in places where consequences are immediate. They are capable of restraint. They simply choose not to use it with you. The sixth unforgivable act is financial exploitation and control. Money is often treated as a practical issue, but in relationships, it is something deeper. Money represents freedom, options, safety, the ability to leave when you need to. When someone controls your finances, they control your future. Financial abuse rarely looks dramatic at first. It looks like forgetfulness, like emergencies, like dependency framed as trust. The partner who never brings their wallet, who always needs help this month, who expects access to your money while keeping theirs separate. In more severe cases, it looks like sabotaging your career, running up debt in your name, discouraging independence while insisting on loyalty, making you feel selfish for wanting boundaries around shared resources. They will ask, "Don't you trust me?" But trust is mutual. Exploitation is not. Sharing requires consent and reciprocity. Control requires neither. Financial abuse traps people. It limits choices quietly. It turns leaving into a logistical nightmare. And that is not accidental. It is strategic. The seventh unforgivable act is deliberate isolation from support systems. This one unfolds slowly. At first, they don't like certain friends. They feel uncomfortable around your family. Your hobbies take too much time. Your career pulls you away from the relationship. Each objection sounds reasonable on its own. Over time, the pattern emerges. You see friends less. You stop calling family. You give up interests that once grounded you. Eventually, they become your primary source of emotional connection. This is not closeness. It is elimination. Isolation removes perspective. Without outside voices, their version of reality becomes the only one you hear. Without support systems, leaving feels impossible. Without witnesses, abuse thrives. I have watched people abandon decades-long friendships because their partner felt threatened by them. Move across the country to avoid family conflict. Leave careers they loved because their partner needed them available. And once isolation is complete, control intensifies. Because now there is nowhere to go and no one to confirm that what is happening is not normal. The eighth unforgivable act is infidelity. Despite how modern culture tries to soften it, infidelity is not an accident. It is a series of decisions. Each message, each meeting, each lie, each step taken to hide the truth. People offer many justifications. We were going through a rough patch. My needs weren't being met. It just happened. Nothing just happens. If a relationship has problems, you communicate. If needs are unmet, you address them or you leave. You do not build a secondary relationship while keeping the primary one as insurance. Infidelity is not just betrayal. It is humiliation. It risks your health. It destroys trust intentionally. And it reveals character. Someone who cheats has shown you that when given the choice between honesty and convenience, they chose convenience. Between loyalty and pleasure, they chose pleasure. And statistically, people who cheat once are significantly more likely to cheat again. Not because they are cursed, but because the internal barrier has already been crossed. The ninth unforgivable act is weaponizing your vulnerabilities. This is one of the most damaging behaviors because its effects last long after the relationship ends. You share your trauma. They use it in an argument. You admit an insecurity. They turn it into an insult when angry. You open up about mental health struggles. They dismiss you as unstable to gain control. When someone does this, they are not simply hurting you in the moment. They are teaching you that vulnerability is dangerous. that honesty leads to punishment, that intimacy is unsafe. This behavior doesn't just damage the relationship, it damages your ability to form future ones. I have seen people stay with partners who weaponize their deepest pain because they believed no one else would understand them. But someone who exploits your pain does not understand it. They study it. Understanding creates compassion. Exploitation creates fear. The 10th unforgivable act is the cycle of abuse, followed by love bombing. This is the most deceptive pattern of all. During the lows, they demean you, control you, hurt you, create chaos. During the highs, they become everything you wanted. Apologetic, attentive, grand gestures, promises of change. This cycle creates trauma bonding. The pain makes the relief feel intoxicating. The unpredictability keeps you anxious, constantly trying to earn the good version of them. You become addicted to the moments when things are calm, not realizing that calm should not require recovery. Healthy relationships do not need repair phases. The love bombing is not remorse. It is fear of abandonment. It is the reset button before the next cycle begins. And each cycle escalates. The lows deepen, the highs shorten, until you are living in constant harm with just enough affection to keep you hopeful. All of these behaviors share one truth. They are not misunderstandings. They are not accidents. They are not isolated moments. They are choices. Repeated, sustained, defended. And when someone chooses these behaviors, believing that love alone will transform them, is not optimism. It is denial. In the next section, we will examine why people stay despite all of this. Not because they are foolish, but because powerful psychological forces are at work. Understanding those forces is essential if you want to break free from them. To understand why people stay in relationships defined by unforgivable behavior, you have to look past judgment and into psychology. Most people do not remain because they enjoy suffering. They remain because leaving threatens something deeper than comfort. It threatens identity. The first force that keeps people trapped is the sunk cost fallacy. I've already given 10 years. We've built so much together. I can't walk away now. Time becomes a chain. The longer you stay, the heavier it feels. But time already spent cannot be recovered by staying longer. Staying does not honor the past. It sacrifices the future to justify it. Every year you remain in a damaging relationship is not a repayment of investment. It is an additional loss. The second force is the fear of being alone. This fear is rarely about loneliness itself. It is about facing yourself without distraction, about silence, about uncertainty, about rebuilding. People tell themselves that being alone would be unbearable. But what they often fail to see is that they are already alone. They are just alone with someone who actively drains them. Being alone can be uncomfortable. Being with someone who erodes your self-worth is destructive. Alone, you can heal. Alone, you can think clearly. Alone, you are safe from someone who hurts you. The third force is the belief that love means endless forgiveness. This belief is often inherited from family, from culture, from stories that romanticize suffering as devotion. People are praised for staying, not for leaving. Endurance is mistaken for virtue. But forgiveness without change is not noble. It is enabling. Forgiveness without boundaries teaches people that harming you has no cost. Real love does not require you to forgive what continues. The fourth force is hope. Hope that they will change. Hope that this time will be different. Hope that understanding their past will fix the present. But explanations are not excuses. Trauma does not justify abuse. Pain does not entitle someone to inflict pain. People who are truly changing do not ask you to wait. They change first, quietly, consistently, without requiring you to absorb further harm as proof of faith. The fifth force is normalization. When dysfunction is familiar, it feels safe. When jealousy is framed as passion, when control is framed as care, when conflict is framed as intensity, toxicity becomes indistinguishable from love. If you grew up watching relationships that involved yelling manipulation or withdrawal, your nervous system may confuse chaos with connection. Calm can feel empty. Respect can feel distant. Stability can feel boring. But common does not mean healthy, and familiar does not mean acceptable. Another reason people stay is the belief that their partner doesn't really mean the harm they cause. They were drunk. They were stressed. They didn't intend it. Alcohol does not create behavior. It reveals it. Stress does not manufacture values. It exposes them. Millions of people experience stress without becoming abusive. Millions of people drink without hurting others. Behavior is a choice even when emotions are intense. One of the hardest truths to accept is that many people who commit unforgivable acts are fully aware of what they are doing. They do not act this way with everyone. They do not disrespect people who hold power over them. They do not lose control in environments where consequences are immediate. They regulate themselves selectively. This realization can be devastating because it removes hope. It forces you to confront the fact that the issue is not circumstance. It is character. When someone shows you that they can behave appropriately when it benefits them but choose not to with you, the message is clear. They believe you will tolerate it. Understanding this is not meant to provoke anger. It is meant to restore clarity. Anger can keep you stuck. Clarity sets you free. Another trap people fall into is confusing responsibility with control. They believe that if they just respond differently, communicate better, or manage situations more carefully, the abuse will stop. But you cannot regulate someone else's behavior for them. You cannot think your way out of someone else's choices. You are responsible for your actions, not for fixing another adult. When relationships become centered around managing someone else's reactions, the relationship has already become unsafe. There is also the belief that leaving is selfish, that choosing yourself is abandonment, that walking away makes you cold or unloving. But self-preservation is not cruelty. It is necessity. Leaving does not mean you never cared. It means you care enough about yourself to refuse further harm. And here is the cost of staying that few people calculate accurately. Your children learn what love looks like by watching you. Your friends quietly adjust their expectations of you. Your career suffers from constant emotional exhaustion. Your health declines under chronic stress. Your entire life begins to orbit someone else's dysfunction. I have seen people lose decades this way, not all at once, slowly, quietly, until one day they look back and realize they no longer recognize themselves. They become cautious, anxious, hypervigilant, afraid to speak, afraid to want, afraid to expect. And when they finally leave, if they leave, the healing takes years. Not because they failed, but because prolonged harm reshapes the nervous system. The most painful part is that many people stay believing they are being strong when in reality, they are being consumed. Strength is not endurance without limits. Strength is discernment. It is knowing when persistence becomes self-betrayal. In the next section, we will look at what healthy relationships actually look like. Not idealized fantasies, but real grounded contrasts that help you recognize what you may have been missing all along. To recognize what is unforgivable, you also need a clear picture of what healthy actually looks like. Not the kind sold in movies, not the kind built on intensity or drama. Real health is quieter than people expect, and that's why so many miss it. Healthy relationships are not free of conflict. They are free of fear. In a healthy relationship, disagreement does not threaten safety. You can speak without bracing for retaliation. You can be honest without rehearsing every word. Conflict is addressed, not weaponized. Respect is not something you earn through endurance. It is the baseline. Healthy partners argue without humiliation. They do not mock you to win. They do not expose your weaknesses to gain leverage. They do not punish honesty with withdrawal or rage. When harm occurs, it is acknowledged directly, without excuses, without deflection. Boundaries exist without surveillance. Healthy partners do not monitor your phone. They do not interrogate your friendships. They do not need constant access to feel secure. Trust is given and maintained, not demanded and violated. Autonomy is not a threat in healthy love. It is expected. Each person remains an individual, with friendships, with interests, with thoughts that do not require approval. There is no need to erase yourself to be chosen. Support does not come with strings. Healthy partners encourage growth even when that growth does not center them. They want you strong, capable, independent, not dependent, not diminished, not contained. Communication does not rely on manipulation. There are no threats of self-harm to win arguments. No guilt used as currency. No emotional hostage-taking. Feelings are expressed, not weaponized. Responsibility for emotions is owned, not outsourced. Love is shown through consistency, not cycles. There is no need for recovery periods. No dramatic rebuilding after destruction. No love bombing to erase harm. Stability is not boring. It is safe. Once you understand this contrast, something uncomfortable happens. You begin to see how far some relationships fall below the minimum standard. Not the ideal, the minimum. And this is where the hardest truth enters. Many people who commit unforgivable acts know exactly what they are doing. This is difficult to accept because it removes the fantasy that they are simply broken, confused, or unaware. It forces you to confront intention. People often say they just lose control, but control is selective. They don't lose control at work. They don't lose control with authority figures. They don't lose control when consequences are guaranteed. They regulate when it matters to them. The person who claims they cannot control their jealousy does not act jealous with colleagues. The person who explodes in anger at home does not explode in front of law enforcement. The person who disrespects your boundaries remembers everyone else's just fine. This is not inability. It is choice. And the reason that choice hurts so deeply is because it reveals priority. They believe you will stay. They believe you will forgive. They believe the cost will be low. Understanding this is not about blaming yourself. It is about releasing false responsibility. You did not cause this behavior. You did not fail to prevent it. You cannot fix it through sacrifice. You cannot love someone into respecting you. Respect is not produced by effort. It is revealed by behavior. Another dangerous belief is that if you explain yourself clearly enough, well, the other person will finally understand and change. But people who repeatedly violate boundaries understand them perfectly. They simply disagree with your right to have them. When someone argues with your boundary instead of respecting it, they are telling you something important. They see your limits as obstacles, not necessities. Healthy partners may not like every boundary, but they honor them. Unhealthy partners negotiate, test, or punish them. And here is a subtle but critical distinction. Love does not require you to be endlessly patient with harm. Patience is appropriate when someone is learning. It is destructive when someone is repeating. At some point, patience stops being kindness and becomes self-neglect. People often ask, how do I know when it's time to leave? The answer is not found in one incident. It is found in patterns. When apologies repeat, but behavior does not change. When accountability is promised, but never sustained. When your world keeps shrinking to accommodate someone else's comfort. That is your answer. Leaving does not require certainty that things will never improve. It requires clarity that staying is costing you too much. Another misconception is that walking away means you are giving up on love. In reality, staying in a relationship that requires you to abandon self-respect is giving up on love. It is accepting a substitute. Real love does not ask you to tolerate harm as proof of devotion. There is also the fear that leaving means you will never find better, that this is as good as it gets, that everyone is like this. But the truth is simpler and harder. Not everyone is like this, but people who are will convince you they are. They normalize dysfunction because it protects them. The moment you step into a healthy dynamic, the contrast can feel shocking. You realize how much energy you were spending managing chaos, how much of yourself you were suppressing to keep peace. You realize that calm does not mean empty, that safety does not mean boring, that respect does not mean distant. It means sustainable. And this is where responsibility shifts back to you. Not for what happened, but for what happens next. You cannot control another person's choices, but you can control access to your life. You can decide what you will no longer negotiate. Boundaries are not ultimatums, they are truths. I will not accept lies. I will not tolerate disrespect. I will not forgive harm that continues. These are not punishments. They are statements of self-worth. In the next section, we will talk about what happens when people finally refuse to forgive the unforgivable. The consequences of leaving, the risks, and the transformation that follows. Because while leaving is not easy, staying costs more than most people realize until it's too late. When people finally stop forgiving the unforgivable, they often expect immediate relief, freedom, peace, closure. What they usually experience first is something else entirely. Disorientation. Leaving a harmful relationship does not instantly restore clarity. It removes the noise, but it also removes the structure you adapted to survive. For a while, the absence can feel louder than the abuse ever was. This is one of the reasons people return, not because the relationship was good, but because it was familiar. Abusive dynamics create routines, emotional cycles, predictable chaos. When those disappear, the nervous system panics. It confuses calm with danger because calm is unfamiliar. Silence feels empty instead of safe. Choice feels heavy instead of freeing. This is not a sign you made the wrong decision. It is a sign you were conditioned. Trauma bonding does not break cleanly. It unravels. Your body may miss the highs. Your mind may replay the good moments. Your memory may soften the harm. This is not weakness. It is chemistry. Extreme stress followed by relief creates powerful attachment. The lows carve fear into the nervous system. The highs flood it with relief. Over time, the relief feels like love, even when it is simply the absence of pain. That is why people return to partners who hurt them. not because they want suffering, but because they are addicted to relief. Understanding this matters, because without it, people misinterpret withdrawal as proof of love. It isn't. It is the body recalibrating. Another difficult reality is that leaving often makes the other person escalate. When forgiveness stops, control is threatened. Suddenly, apologies become intense. Promises become dramatic. Insight appears overnight. They say everything you have been waiting years to hear. This is not change. It is panic. Real change is quiet. It is consistent. It does not require an audience or a deadline. And it does not ask you to stay while it proves itself. People who are genuinely changing accept consequences without argument. They do not demand access to you as proof of faith. They do not frame your boundary as cruelty. They understand that harm has a cost. Those who are not changing will accuse you of being cold, of abandoning them, of giving up too easily. They may rewrite history, minimize their actions, blame your reaction. This is when clarity matters most. You are not responsible for managing their emotions after you stop accepting harm. You are not obligated to stay accessible so they can feel better about losing control. Guilt is often the final weapon. If you really loved me, after everything we've been through, no one will ever love you like I do. These statements are not love. They are fear speaking. Fear of losing access, fear of consequences, fear of facing themselves without you absorbing the damage. Leaving does not make you cruel. It makes you unavailable for further harm. There is also a quiet grief that follows leaving even when the relationship was destructive. You grieve the future you imagined, the version of them you hoped would appear, the time you cannot recover. This grief is real, and it deserves space. Many people feel ashamed of this grief. They believe that because the relationship was harmful, they should only feel relief. But grief does not require a healthy object. It requires attachment. And attachment existed even if it was painful. Allowing yourself to grieve does not mean you made the wrong choice. It means you are human. As time passes, something subtle begins to shift. Your nervous system starts to settle. Your thoughts slow down. Your body exits survival mode. You notice how quiet mornings feel, how decisions no longer require calculation, how your words no longer feel dangerous. You start to remember yourself, not all at once, in fragments, a laugh that comes easily, an opinion spoken without fear, a boundary held without explanation. This is not transformation. It is restoration. People often underestimate how much of themselves they gave up to survive. They adapted their tone, their expectations, their desires, their standards. Leaving allows those suppressed parts to return. And when they do, something else happens. Perspective. You begin to see the relationship clearly, not through nostalgia or fear, but through distance. Patterns become obvious. Manipulations lose their power. Apologies sound different when you are no longer dependent on them. You stop asking why they did it. You stop analyzing what you could have done differently. You accept the simplest truth. They chose themselves at your expense. This acceptance is not bitter. It is grounding. It frees you from trying to extract meaning from someone else's dysfunction. It redirects your attention back to where it belongs, your life. One of the most profound changes after leaving unforgivable behavior is the return of trust. Not trust in others first, trust in yourself. You begin to believe your perceptions again. You stop second-guessing your reactions. You recognize discomfort as information, not weakness. This is critical because abusive relationships train you to distrust your own instincts. Healing restores that internal compass. Another shift occurs in how you relate to others. You become more selective, more deliberate, less willing to explain boundaries that should be obvious. This is not hardness. It is discernment. You stop mistaking intensity for connection. You stop equating chaos with passion. You stop believing that love requires suffering to be meaningful. And here is something few people talk about. When you leave an unforgivable relationship, your life often expands rapidly. Friends reappear. Opportunities resurface. Energy returns. Not because the world changed, but because you are no longer using all of your resources to manage someone else's instability. This can feel overwhelming at first. Growth often does. But it is the kind of overwhelm that builds, not breaks. Of course, leaving is not without risk, especially in relationships involving control or violence. That is why planning matters. Documentation matters, support matters, safety matters. Leaving quietly is often safer than announcing it. Protecting finances and important documents matters. Telling someone you trust matters. Strength is not impulsive. It is strategic. Refusing to forgive the unforgivable does not mean you lack compassion. It means you finally extended compassion to yourself. And once you do that, something irreversible happens. You cannot unsee what you now understand. You cannot go back to believing that love should hurt this much. You cannot convince yourself that your needs are excessive. You cannot shrink again without noticing. This is the point of no return. In the next section, we will address the final layer of this conversation: what it means for your future, how to move forward without carrying the damage with you, and how to ensure that what you survived becomes wisdom, not a wound you reopen. After the initial shock of leaving fades, a quieter question emerges. Not about the past, but about the future. How do I make sure I never end up here again? This is where many people rush. They want rules, red flags lists, absolute guarantees. But healing does not come from hypervigilance. It comes from integration, from understanding what happened without letting it define what comes next. The goal is not to become guarded. It is to become grounded. One of the first shifts that needs to happen is how you interpret discomfort. In unhealthy relationships, discomfort is often dismissed. You are taught to ignore it, to rationalize it, to call it insecurity, sensitivity, or fear. Over time, you learn to override your own internal signals. Healing reverses that process. Discomfort becomes information again. Not proof that something is wrong with you, but a signal that something deserves attention. You stop forcing yourself to be okay with things that quietly erode you. You stop explaining away patterns that feel off simply because they are not dramatic. You learn to trust the early signs. Another critical shift is learning the difference between attraction and alignment. Many people mistake intensity for compatibility. They confuse chemistry with safety. They pursue relationships that feel familiar to their nervous systems, even when that familiarity is rooted in chaos. Healthy alignment feels different. It does not rush you. It does not demand immediate depth. It does not spike anxiety. It unfolds. This can feel unsettling at first. Without highs and lows, your body may interpret stability as lack of interest. This is where patience with yourself matters. Calm is not absence. It is presence without threat. As you heal, your standards change. Not because you become demanding, but because you become clear. You stop negotiating basic respect. You stop tolerating dishonesty framed as complexity. You stop confusing potential with reality. You learn to evaluate people based on behavior, not promises. Consistency becomes attractive. Accountability becomes essential. Emotional safety becomes non-negotiable. Another important aspect of moving forward is releasing the need to fully understand or forgive the past in order to heal. Closure does not come from explanations. It comes from acceptance. You may never receive a satisfying apology. You may never hear the truth delivered cleanly. Waiting for those things keeps you tied to the person who harmed you. Healing begins when you stop needing them to confirm what you already know. The truth is not hidden. It was lived. Another challenge people face is the fear of repeating patterns. They worry that because it happened once, it will happen again. That something about them attracts harm. This belief is understandable. It is also incomplete. Patterns repeat when they are unconscious. Awareness changes the equation. You are no longer the person who tolerated what you once did. Not because you are hardened, but because you are informed. You have context. You have language. You have memory. Experience, when processed, becomes discernment. This is also where the self-compassion becomes essential. Many people blame themselves for staying too long, for ignoring signs, for loving someone who harmed them. They replay decisions endlessly, searching for the moment they should have known better. But you cannot judge past versions of yourself with present awareness. You did the best you could with what you knew at the time. You survived. That matters. Shame does not protect you from future harm. Understanding does. Another layer of healing involves redefining what love means to you. Not what you were taught, not what you endured, but what you now require. Love that respects boundaries without negotiation. Love that communicates directly without manipulation. Love that feels safe even during conflict. This kind of love exists, but it requires something from you as well. Availability. Not availability to others at any cost, but availability to yourself, to your needs, to your limits, to your truth. When you abandon yourself, you become vulnerable to people who benefit from that abandonment. When you remain anchored in yourself, those people lose interest quickly. This is not magic. It is incompatibility. As you move forward, you may notice that certain dynamics no longer appeal to you. People who rely on chaos control or emotional games may feel dull or exhausting rather than exciting. This is a sign of growth, not loss. You are no longer wired to confuse stimulation with connection. Another important step is rebuilding trust slowly. Not blind trust, not suspicion, measured trust. You allow people to earn access through consistent behavior. You do not rush intimacy. You do not share vulnerabilities before safety is established. You observe how people handle disagreement, boundaries, and accountability. You let time reveal character. This does not make you closed. It makes you intentional. It is also important to recognize that healing is not linear. There will be moments when old doubts surface, when loneliness whispers that compromise might be easier, when memory selectively highlights the good. These moments do not mean you are regressing. They mean you are human. The difference now is that you do not act on them blindly. You pause. You assess. You choose differently. That choice repeated over time is healing. As your life stabilizes, something else becomes clear. Your capacity for joy expands. Not the kind tied to relief or approval, but the kind rooted in freedom, in self-respect, in peace. You laugh more easily. You sleep better. You feel less vigilant. You realize how much energy was once spent managing someone else's emotional world. And perhaps most importantly, you stop measuring your worth by someone else's ability to treat you well. your worth becomes intrinsic again. This is the quiet victory that follows refusing to forgive the unforgivable. You reclaim authorship of your life. In the final section, we will bring all of this together. The meaning of boundaries, the role of forgiveness, and the truth about what you are actually choosing when you walk away from harm. When everything is stripped down, this conversation is not really about relationships. It is about choice, not the dramatic kind, not the one made in a single moment, but the quiet daily choice between self-respect and self-erasure. People often ask whether those who commit unforgivable acts truly understand the damage they cause. The uncomfortable answer is that many of them do. Not always intellectually, not always with language. But behavior reveals understanding more reliably than words ever could. They know when to restrain themselves. They know when to perform remorse. They know when to escalate and when to soften. This is not confusion. It is calculation. The myth that abusers are simply out of control protects them from accountability. It turns choice into inevitability. It reframes harm as accident. And it keeps people waiting for a version of the relationship that will never arrive. If someone can control their behavior in situations where consequences are immediate, they can control it elsewhere. When they do not, it is because the cost-benefit calculation allows it. This realization is painful because it removes hope, but it also restores power. Hope that depends on someone else changing without consequence is not hope. It is suspension. And suspension is where many people lose years of their lives. Another truth that becomes clear with distance is this: not every apology is an apology. Some apologies are negotiations. Some are distractions. Some are tools to reset access. A real apology does not focus on how bad the person feels. It focuses on what they did and how it will not happen again. It does not demand forgiveness. It accepts distance if that is what safety requires. When apologies repeat without change, they are not signs of growth. They are signs of stability in dysfunction. One of the most damaging beliefs people carry is that loving someone means staying available no matter what. That leaving is abandonment. That boundaries are betrayals. But boundaries are not walls. They are doors with conditions. They say, "This is how you treat me if you want access to my life." When someone refuses those conditions, they are making a choice. And that choice has consequences. Choosing yourself does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop negotiating your humanity. Another misconception is that refusing to forgive means carrying resentment forever. It does not. You can release someone emotionally without granting them continued access. You can move forward without rewriting the past to make it more tolerable. Forgiveness is not a prerequisite for healing. Safety is. Many people confuse closure with understanding. They believe that if they can just make sense of what happened, the pain will dissolve. But pain often dissolves not through explanation, but through acceptance. Acceptance does not mean approval. It means acknowledging reality without distortion. The reality is that some people will take everything you give them and still ask for more. Some will interpret patience as permission. Some will confuse kindness with weakness. That is not a failure of love. It is a failure of boundaries. As you move further from unforgivable relationships, you may notice another subtle shift. Your tolerance for ambiguity decreases. You become less willing to live in gray areas where your safety or dignity is unclear. This is not rigidity. It is clarity. You stop accepting almost apologies. You stop believing in potential without evidence. You stop waiting for consistency that never arrives. You begin to measure relationships by how they make your life function, not by how intense they feel. Does your nervous system relax around this person? Do you feel more like yourself or less? Do your boundaries strengthen the relationship or threaten it? These questions matter more than chemistry ever will. Another difficult aspect of this journey is confronting how much you tolerated in the name of love. This can bring anger at the other person, at yourself. At the time lost, anger is not a problem. Suppression is. Anger, when processed, becomes information. It clarifies values, it sharpens boundaries, it signals where harm occurred. The danger lies in letting anger turn inward. You were not foolish for hoping. You were not weak for staying. You were responding to what you were taught about love. Now you know more. That is growth. As this knowledge integrates, something important happens. You stop romanticizing suffering. You no longer believe that love must be earned through pain. You no longer equate endurance with depth. You no longer admire those who stay at the cost of themselves. You begin to admire those who leave with integrity. This shift can feel isolating, especially if people around you still normalize toxic dynamics. You may outgrow conversations, social circles, old advice. This is not arrogance. It is alignment. You are no longer willing to participate in narratives that require your silence or self-sacrifice. Another truth that emerges is this: refusing to forgive the unforgivable often inspires others more than you realize. Not through speeches, not through confrontation, but through example. When people see you choose yourself, it disrupts the belief that endurance is the only option. It gives permission. It opens doors. You may never know who you helped simply by leaving. And then, there is the future. Many people fear that leaving a destructive relationship will harden them, that they will become closed, cynical, or unable to love again. What often happens instead is discernment. You become more open, not less. But you are open selectively. You are no longer available to chaos, masquerading as connection. You learn to recognize safety early. You value steadiness. You appreciate communication that does not require decoding. Love, when it arrives, feels different. It does not spike your anxiety. It does not require constant reassurance. It does not demand self-abandonment. It feels mutual. And perhaps most importantly, you no longer need love to prove your worth. You bring your worth with you. This is the point where the story changes. Not because everything becomes perfect, but because you stop accepting harm as the price of connection. In the final section, we will bring this conversation to its conclusion. Not with instructions, but with clarity. About forgiveness, about boundaries, and about what it truly means to choose yourself without apology. There is one lesson that sits underneath everything we've talked about, and it's this: love is not proven by how much pain you can endure. That idea has quietly ruined more lives than open cruelty ever could. Real love does not ask you to disappear. It does not require you to doubt your own mind. It does not demand that you trade safety, dignity, or peace for the privilege of staying. In real life, the most dangerous moments are not when things are obviously falling apart. They are when things are almost okay, when the harm is intermittent, when the apologies sound sincere, when the good moments are just strong enough to keep you questioning your own instincts. That's when people stay the longest. That's when they lose the most. Here's the truth that takes maturity to accept: you can care deeply about someone and still walk away. You can understand their pain without allowing it to become yours. You can forgive internally without reopening the door. Self-respect is not cruelty. It is clarity. A meaningful life isn't built on how much you tolerate. It's built on what you protect. Your time, your nervous system, your ability to trust yourself. Once those are gone, no relationship is worth the cost. If something in this series resonated with you, I'd really like to hear from you. What patterns did you recognize? What boundaries are you realizing you need to hold? Leave a comment not to judge, but to reflect. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if conversations like this matter to you, consider subscribing to the channel. Calmly, on your own terms.